I was in Calgary with Premier Smith, and we announced a landmark agreement, the next step in a landmark agreement, on a wide range of issues. Very much centered on the energy sector, all aspects of energy, new pipeline, new carbon capture, opportunities to cooperate with neighboring provinces, moving forward with new technologies like geothermal, nuclear, others. A couple days ago, I was in British Columbia with Premier Eby, and we're committed to working together to moving forward on a series of exciting opportunities in British Columbia, from expansion of the port, improving logistics, clean energy across that province, working with First Nations to make British Columbia even better as part of Canada. And a lot of that progress will involve working with other parts of Canada, of course the federal government, but with Alberta in particular.
Canada is facing a growing debate, but Mark Carney's response was not what many expected. Instead of warnings or threats, he painted a picture of a country working together, with Alberta at the center. What this means could change the conversation in a big way. Standing inside Canada's Library of Parliament, surrounded by one of the most recognizable rotundas in the country, Mark Carney delivered a speech about Alberta evening that was not what the separation movement wanted to hear. He did not engage the referendum politics on their own terms. He did not respond with warnings or federal power plays or legal threats about the consequences of provincial separation. He responded with something the separation campaign has far more difficulty countering: a detailed province-by-province account of a federal government actively cooperating with every part of the country, with Alberta at the center of that cooperation, and a tone so confident and optimistic that the manufactured grievance narrative had nowhere to land. Carney began with history. He cited the contributions of Albertans to Canada's national story: Prime Minister Joe Clark, Canada's youngest Prime Minister when elected, Prime Minister Stephen Harper, Don Mazinkowski, the legendary parliamentarian from Vegreville. He went further back to Nellie McClung and the Famous Five, the Alberta women who traveled to Ottawa approximately a century ago to argue the Persons Case, the legal challenge that established women's right to vote in Canada. These were not perfunctory references. They were a deliberate argument embedded in biographical form. Alberta has always been central to what Canada is. The separation rhetoric assumes an adversarial relationship between Alberta and the federal government that the historical record does not support. Then Carney made it concrete and current. 1 week before standing in the Library of Parliament, he had been in Calgary with Premier Danielle Smith, signing what he described as a landmark agreement, the next step in the energy cooperation framework, covering a wide range of issues: a new pipeline, new carbon capture, cooperation with neighboring provinces, new technologies including geothermal and nuclear. That agreement is documented and signed. The pipeline cooperation it represents is real federal policy, not rhetorical positioning. 2 days after Calgary, Carney was in British Columbia with Premier David Eby, committing to expansion of the Port of Prince Rupert, improved logistics, clean energy across the province, and partnerships with First Nations on economic development, much of which, Carney noted, will involve working with Alberta specifically. While he was in BC, his ministerial colleagues were in Newfoundland and Labrador, working with that province's government. He had been speaking with both the Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador and the Premier of Quebec about Churchill Falls, the hydroelectric opportunity that could simultaneously generate massive amounts of clean energy, benefit both provinces, and contribute to Canada's national energy strategy. The list continued: Saskatchewan, Ontario and nuclear, the Maritimes and clean energy, Manitoba and Churchill and export opportunities, the territories and Arctic sovereignty and economic development. Carney described a federal government simultaneously engaged in active, productive cooperation with every province and territory in the country, not waiting for the separation pressure to intensify before responding, but building the cooperative relationships that make the political case for separation harder to sustain with each new agreement signed. The metaphor he returned to was Parliament itself, the building under renovation behind the door he gestured toward. The center block of Parliament has been under renovation for years and will continue for years more. When it is finished, it will be better than before, up to code, better conference facilities, better heating, better cooling. It will work better. Just like Canada. Canada is the greatest country in the world, Carney said, but it can be better. and we are working on making it better. We are working with Alberta on making it better. The political analysis that surrounds this speech identifies the specific contradiction at the heart of Danielle Smith's current position. Mark Carney is openly supporting new pipelines. He is supporting resource development. He is supporting energy expansion and Alberta's export ambitions. He is working directly with Alberta's government on the largest energy infrastructure proposals in the province's modern history. The conditions that historically fueled Western alienation, a federal government opposed to pipelines, dismissive of Alberta's resource economy, imposing carbon pricing frameworks Alberta considered hostile to its industry, are not the conditions currently in place. Carney has accepted the carbon pricing pathway Alberta sought, committed to a national interest designation for a West Coast pipeline, and framed Alberta's energy sector as central to Canada's ambition to become a global energy superpower. Which raises the question that the Separation campaign cannot easily answer. If Ottawa is already cooperating with Alberta on many of its most significant priorities, what exactly is the Separation referendum designed to achieve that negotiation with the current federal government cannot produce? The comparison that has emerged among political analysts is to former British Prime Minister David Cameron and Brexit. Cameron called the referendum on whether Britain should leave the European Union, calculating it would be easy to control and would put the matter to rest. It was not easy to control. Britain voted to leave. Britain is now demonstrably poorer for having done so. Estimates put the economic cost at approximately 8% of GDP compared to what continued EU membership would have produced. The parallel is not that Alberta separation would necessarily produce the same outcome, but that referendums on fundamental constitutional questions are not easy to control once launched, and that the forces they activate can exceed what any individual political leader can manage. Smith appears to have recognized a version of this problem. She created political energy around separation grievance at a moment when she had a federal government more philosophically opposed to Alberta's energy priorities. That federal government is no longer in power. The Carney government has been more receptive to Alberta's core economic demands than any Liberal government in recent memory. The separation energy she cultivated has not dissipated because the federal government changed it, has continued building on its own momentum, driven by online communities, advocacy organizations, and political actors whose investment in the grievance narrative does not diminish simply because the specific federal policies that fueled it have been modified. Carney's speech was addressed to those dynamics as much as to any formal policy debate. He was not speaking to separation advocates who are beyond persuasion. He was speaking to the much larger group of Albertans who are frustrated with certain federal policies, who feel that Alberta's contributions to Canadian prosperity have been underappreciated, and who are susceptible to separation arguments when the federal government appears hostile or dismissive. For those Albertans, a prime minister standing in the Library of Parliament citing the Famous Five and Joe Clark and Don Mazankowski, describing active pipeline negotiations and a landmark energy agreement signed in Calgary the previous week, and framing Alberta as essential to Canada's future rather than as a region to be managed, that is a different message than the one the separation movement is amplifying. He committed to 100,000 new apprenticeships over the next decade. He spoke of Alberta healthcare workers and prairie farmers, the export markets his government had worked to reopen in time for planting season. He thanked Premier Smith, the leader of the opposition, all 37 members of parliament from Alberta, and Albertans of all political stripes